The fluorescent lights of the gym always seemed a little bit brighter, a little bit more unforgiving as the clock ticked past midnight. That was my time. The time when the crowds thinned out, leaving only the dedicated, the obsessed, and the lonely. I stood in front of the wall-to-wall mirrors, staring at a version of myself I barely recognized. My shoulders were broader now, the result of 2 years of consistent grinding discipline. My jawline was sharper, the soft edges of my early 20s long gone, replaced by the lean precision of a man who took care of himself. I had the job, the apartment, the physique, and the stability that every how-to guide on the internet promised would be the key to everything. But as I watched my own reflection, all I could see were the invisible training wheels. I'm turning 30 this year. There's something heavy about that number, something that feels like a finality. It's a threshold where you're expected to have the game figured out, where the awkward stumbles of youth are supposed to have hardened into a polished, effortless confidence. But for me, 30 feels like a giant spotlight aimed directly at a void in my life. I have spent a total of 5 years in a relationship, just one. One single long transformative relationship that occupied the entirety of my mid-20s. At the time, I thought I was winning. I thought I had bypassed the messy, painful trial and error phase of dating that everyone else was complaining about. While my friends were navigating the chaos of dating apps and one-night stands, I was comfortable. I was settled. I was learning how to be a partner to one specific person, unaware that I was failing to learn how to be a man in the world at large. When that relationship ended, the world I stepped back into felt alien. It was like I had been in cryosleep for half a decade and woke up to find that the language of attraction had changed, and I didn't have the dictionary. I tried at first. I really did. I put myself out there with the naive optimism of someone who thought that being a good guy with a steady paycheck was enough. I asked women out at coffee shops through mutual friends, even the occasional brave approach in a bookstore, and for every attempt I received a polite firm or sometimes confused no. After a while, the no's started to stack up like bricks building a wall between me and the rest of the world. So I stopped. I retreated. I told myself I needed to work on me. I dove into the gym. I climbed the corporate ladder. I fixed my credit, bought better clothes, and learned how to cook meals that didn't come out of a microwave. I did everything the self-improvement gurus told me to do. And yet here I am staring at 30 feeling like a fraud. Because despite the muscles and the promotion, I feel like I carry a scent. It's not something you can wash off with expensive cologne. It's the smell of inexperience. It's a subtle pheromonal broadcast of my own uncertainty. I am convinced that when I talk to a woman, she can see the gears grinding in my head. She can see the way I second guess the timing of a joke or the way I hesitate before making eye contact for a second too long. It feels like they have a sixth sense for it, a built-in radar that detects the inexperienced male and immediately flags him as not relationship material. It's a crushing realization. You can build the most beautiful car in the world, polish the chrome until it shines like a diamond, and tune the engine until it purrs, but if there's no one behind the wheel who knows how to drive, it's just a heavy piece of metal sitting in a garage. That's me. I'm the car in the garage. I feel like I'm missing a core piece of social programming that everyone else received in their early 20s while I was busy playing house. There are nuances to the game that I simply don't grasp, the subtle push and pull, the tension, the ability to lead a conversation into deeper waters without making it feel like an interrogation. To me, it feels like I'm trying to play a high-stakes poker game without knowing what the cards mean, while everyone else at the table is reading my face like an open book. I often wonder if it's all in my head, but the results speak for themselves. There's a specific look a woman gives you when she realizes you're not calibrated. It's not a look of disgust, which might actually be easier to handle. It's a look of mild pity mixed with a lack of interest. It's the look you give a kid who's trying to join a conversation about politics. You smile, you're polite, but you don't actually take them seriously. I feel like I'm perpetually stuck in that not taken seriously category. I'm the nice guy who has his life together but lacks the spark, the edge, or the it factor that comes from years of romantic successes and failures. The irony is that to get the experience, you need someone to give you a chance. But to get someone to give you a chance, you need the experience. It's the ultimate entry-level job, requires 10 years of experience, paradox, played out in the most personal and painful arena of life. I find myself sitting in bars sometimes just watching. I see guys who aren't as fit as me, guys who don't have half the stability I do moving through the room with an ease that I would give anything to possess. They know how to touch a woman's arm to emphasize a point. They know how to lean in just enough to create intimacy without being overbearing. They know how to navigate the silence. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there calculating the correct move like a computer running an outdated operating system, and by the time I've reached a conclusion, the moment has passed. The gym helps in a way. The iron doesn't care if I'm naive. The weights don't judge me for my lack of dating history. When I'm under a heavy bar, the only thing that matters is the reality of the weight and my ability to move it. It's honest. It's direct. But then I leave the gym walk out into the cool night air, and I'm back in the world of ambiguity and subtext. I look at my phone scrolling through apps that feel like digital graveyards of my own self-esteem. Every swipe feels like a reminder of what I lack. Every ghosted conversation feels like a confirmation of my deepest fear that I am fundamentally off-putting because I haven't leveled up in the way a 30-year-old man is supposed to. I tell myself that 30 is just a number that plenty of people find their way later in life, but the narrative in my head is louder. It tells me that I've missed the window. It tells me that women my age are looking for a man who is a finished product, someone who knows his way around a relationship, someone who knows how to handle the complexities of adult intimacy without the training wheels. They don't want to be the one to teach a 30-year-old how to date. They want someone who already knows the steps to the dance. And here I am still trying to remember which foot goes where, terrified that I'm going to step on their toes and remind them exactly why I've been alone for so long. The weight of that fear, the fear of being found out, is what keeps me up at night. It's a strange, quiet kind of anxiety. It isn't the heart-pounding terror of a physical threat. It's the slow, cold realization that you might be fundamentally ill-equipped for the world you're living in. I remember a specific Friday night not too long ago that perfectly encapsulated this feeling. One of my coworkers, a guy named Mike, who seemed to have a different dating story every Monday morning, invited a group of us out to a lounge in the city. Usually I'd make an excuse. I'd say I had a leg day scheduled or a project to finish. But that night, fueled by a rare spark of what if, I decided to go. I dressed with meticulous care. I wore a dark fitted button down that showed off the work I'd put in at the gym. I checked my reflection more times than I care to admit. I looked like a man who knew what he was doing. I looked like a man who belonged. The lounge was one of those places where the air is thick with expensive perfume and the low hum of curated playlists. The lighting was dim, casting long dramatic shadows over the velvet booths. As soon as I walked in, I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. Mike was already there holding a drink and laughing with two women I didn't recognize. He spotted me and waved me over. "Hey, look who made it, the man of mystery himself," he joked, clapping me on the shoulder. He introduced me to the women. One was a friend of his, the other was her roommate, Elena. Elena was striking. She had a way of looking at you that felt like she was reading a book you didn't even know you were writing. She smiled, and for a split second, I felt that rush of possibility. But then the conversation started, and as it did, I felt the training wheels lock into place. Mike and the others were talking about travel, about past relationships, about the messy, hilarious disasters of their 20s. They spoke a shorthand of shared experiences that I simply didn't possess. When the topic turned to the worst date you've ever been on, I felt the sweat start to prickle at the back of my neck. Mike told a story about a girl who brought her cat to a 5-star restaurant. Elena shared a story about a guy who spent the entire night talking about his collection of vintage staplers. They were laughing, the energy was high, and then the spotlight turned to me. "What about you?" Elena asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. "What's your horror story?" I froze. My mind raced through my history, 5 years with one person. Before that, a few awkward high school fumbles. There were no horror stories because there were no stories at all. I hadn't been on enough dates to have a worst one. I had spent my prime dating years in a comfortable, predictable bubble. I couldn't tell them that. I couldn't admit that at nearly 30, my total number of first dates could be counted on one hand. So I did what I always do. I played it safe. I gave a vague, non-committal answer about a girl who was just a bit boring. The energy in the group immediately dipped. It was like I had thrown a wet blanket over a fire. I saw Elena's expression shift just a fraction of an inch from genuine interest to a polite, "Oh, okay." She didn't say anything negative, but I felt the distance grow between us instantly. In that moment, I felt that scent I'm always worried about. It wasn't that I was a bad person or that I was unattractive. It was that I lacked the texture that comes from living a life of trial and error. I was too smooth, too guarded, too afraid to be messy. I sat there for the next hour, nodding along, laughing at the right times, but I was a ghost in the room. I was a well-dressed, fit, successful man who had absolutely nothing to contribute to the raw human experience of connection. I watched Mike flirt with his friend. It was effortless. He teased her. He challenged her. He used silence as a tool. He wasn't afraid of a no because he'd heard it 1,000 times before. To him, dating was a game of volume and practice. To me, every interaction felt like a final exam I hadn't studied for. When I finally left that night walking alone to my car through the quiet city streets, the silence was deafening. I thought about those 5 years I'd spent in my relationship. We were high school sweethearts who found each other again in our early 20s. It was easy. It was safe. We grew up together, but in a way we also stunted each other. We built a world where we didn't have to learn how to attract anyone else because we already had each other. We didn't have to learn the subtle cues of body language or the art of conversation with a stranger. When that world collapsed, I was left standing in the rubble, a fully grown man with the social toolkit of a teenager. The gym has become my sanctuary because it's the only place where the progress is linear. If I lift more weight this week than I did last week, I have objectively improved. There is no ambiguity. There is no subtext. But in the world of women and dating, the metrics are invisible. I can have the perfect body, the perfect job, and the perfect apartment, and it can all be rendered meaningless by a single moment of social hesitation. I feel like I'm trapped in a cycle of overcompensation. I think if I just get a little leaner, if I just get a slightly better promotion, then maybe I'll finally feel worthy. But deep down, I know that's a lie. I'm trying to solve a social problem with physical and financial solutions. It's like trying to learn a new language by buying more expensive pens. The most frustrating part is the feeling that I am being judged for something I didn't even realize I was supposed to be learning. I see women on social media or hear them in podcasts talking about what they want in a man. They want emotional intelligence. They want confidence. They want someone who knows what he wants. And I want to scream, I am all of those things. I am reliable. I am hardworking. I am ready for a lifelong partner. But because I don't have the game, because I don't have the experience, I am filtered out before I even get a chance to show them who I am. It feels like there's a secret handshake to get into the world of adult relationships, and I was in the bathroom when everyone else was taught it. I look at my friends who are married or in long-term relationships, and I feel a pang of envy that I'm not proud of. They make it look so simple. They talk about their wives or girlfriends with an ease that suggests it was all inevitable. But for me, it feels like a mountain I have to climb every single day. I find myself overanalyzing every single interaction I have with a woman, no matter how brief. Did I hold the door too long? Was that joke too dry? Did I seem desperate when I asked for her number? It's an exhausting way to live. It turns the simple act of human connection into a tactical mission where the stakes are my own sanity and self-worth. I'm starting to realize that the scent of inexperience isn't just about what I haven't done, it's about the fear I carry because of it. It's the vibe of a man who is terrified of making a mistake. And the irony is that women, more than anything, seem to be drawn to men who are comfortable with their own imperfections. They're drawn to the man who can fail, laugh it off, and try again. But because I feel like I'm already so far behind, I feel like I don't have the luxury of failing. I feel like every rejection is a referendum on my entire existence. I'm playing a game where I think I'm on my last life while everyone else is playing with infinite respawns. The blue light of my phone screen is often the last thing I see before I fall into a restless sleep. At 2 a.m., when the rest of the world is quiet, the dating apps feel like a digital purgatory. I've spent hours, no days, perfecting my profile. I've curated the photos to show the best version of me, the one hiking in the mountains, the one laughing at a friend's wedding, and the one in the gym where the lighting hits my triceps just right. I've rewritten my bio a dozen times, trying to strike that impossible balance between successful professional and laid-back guy who doesn't take himself too seriously. But every time I hit save, I feel like I'm just putting another coat of paint on a house that's empty inside. A few months ago, I matched with a woman named Sarah. She was 31, a corporate lawyer with a sharp wit and a smile that seemed to challenge the camera. For the first time in a long time, the conversation actually flowed. We traded banter about our shared hatred of cilantro and our mutual love for obscure 90s thrillers. For 2 weeks, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt since my long-term relationship ended hope. I wasn't just the guy at the gym or the guy with the steady job. I was a person she wanted to talk to. I started to think that maybe the scent of my inexperience was finally fading. Maybe I was finally learning how to play the game. When we finally agreed to meet at a quiet wine bar downtown, I spent an hour getting ready. I checked the mirror, adjusted my collar, and practiced my relaxed posture. I told myself to be present, to listen, and above all, to be bold. I knew that my biggest flaw was my tendency to be too careful, too respectful to the point of being invisible. I walked into that bar with a script in my head, a set of invisible instructions on how a confident 30-year-old man should behave. The date started well. Sarah looked even better in person, and the conversation picked up right where the text had left off. We laughed, we shared stories, and for the first hour, I felt like I was actually doing it. I was navigating the waters of a first date without drowning. But as the night wore on, I felt the familiar weight of the training wheels pressing down on me. There was a moment, a lull in the conversation, where the air grew heavy with a different kind of silence. Sarah leaned in slightly, her eyes lingering on mine. The script in my head screamed that this was the moment to reach across the table to touch her hand, or to shift the conversation into something more intimate. But I hesitated. That split second of hesitation felt like an eternity. In my mind, 1,000 questions fired off. Is it too soon? What if she pulls away? What if I'm misreading the signal? Am I being too aggressive while I was busy calculating the risks and benefits like a corporate auditor? The moment evaporated. Sarah blinked, leaned back, and took a sip of her wine. The tension, the good kind, the electric kind was gone, replaced by a polite professional friendliness. I had played it safe, I had stayed within the lines, and in doing so, I had failed. The walk to her car was agonizing. I knew the no spark text was coming before I even put my keys in the ignition of my own car. I tried to make one last-ditch effort at the end, a lingering hug that felt more awkward than affectionate. She smiled that same polite smile I'd seen on so many other women, the one that says, "You're a great guy, but I don't feel anything." The text arrived the next morning. "Hey, I really enjoyed meeting you, and you seem like a truly wonderful person. But honestly, I didn't feel that romantic spark I'm looking for. I wish you the best of luck. Wonderful person." Those words felt like a death sentence. To a man in my position, being a wonderful person is the ultimate consolation prize. It's the participation trophy of the dating world. It means I didn't do anything wrong, but I didn't do anything right either. I was safe. I was predictable. I was inexperienced. I realized then that my politeness was actually a shield. I was so afraid of being that guy, the pushy guy, the creep, the one who doesn't take a hint that I had swung too far in the other direction. I was so careful not to offend that I had forgotten how to attract. This is the core of my struggle. I feel like I'm trapped in a cage of my own making, built out of the good guy values I was raised with. I was taught to be respectful, to be a gentleman, to wait for a clear signal. But the world doesn't work that way. The world of adult dating is built on nuance, on risks, on the ability to read the unsaid. And because I missed out on those formative years of messy dating, I don't have the intuition to know when to break the rules. I'm still waiting for permission to be a man while every other guy my age has already realized that permission isn't something you're given, it's something you take. I go back to the gym the next day and I push myself harder than usual. I add another plate to the bar, feeling the strain in my chest and the fire in my lungs. Physical pain is so much easier to handle than the dull, constant ache of inadequacy. In the gym, if I fail, I just drop the weight. I can try again in 5 minutes. But with Sarah and with all the Sarahs who came before her, there are no do-overs. You get one shot, one window of time to show that you're a sexual romantic being, and if you miss it, the door slams shut forever. I find myself looking at the older men in the gym, the guys in their 40s and 50s, who move with a quiet, grounded certainty. I wonder if they ever felt like this. Did they have to learn how to be confident, or was it something they were born with? I feel like I'm a child wearing a man's suit, hoping that if I stand tall enough and talk deep enough, no one will notice that I'm actually terrified. I'm turning 30, and the gap between who I am and who the world expects me to be is widening every day. Sometimes I think about that 5-year relationship. I think about the girl I loved and how easy it was back then. We didn't have to date. We just were. We were kids who fell into a rhythm. But that rhythm didn't prepare me for the symphony of the real world. It was like learning to play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star on a toy piano and then being expected to perform Mozart at Carnegie Hall. I have the technical skill, the job, the body, the life, but I don't have the soul. I don't have the rhythm. I see women on the street, at the grocery store, at work, and I wonder what they see when they look at me. Do they see the man who can bench press 300 pounds and manage a team of 10 people? Or do they see the guy who is still wearing his training wheels invisible and heavy, dragging behind him wherever he goes? I'm starting to think that the only way to get rid of them is to fall, to crash, to make a fool of myself so completely that the fear of failure finally loses its power. But how do you start falling when you've spent your whole life trying to stay upright? The office environment is a strange mirror. In the world of deadlines, quarterly reports, and strategic planning, I am a king. I sit at my desk, the glass walls of the conference room reflecting a man who is composed, articulate, and undeniably competent. When I speak, people listen. When I lead a project, it succeeds. I've mastered the art of professional game, the firm handshake, the steady eye contact, the ability to pivot under pressure. But as I sit through another Monday morning briefing, watching my colleagues chat about their weekend plans, I feel like an undercover agent in a country where I don't speak the language. My desk neighbor David is 34. He's the kind of guy who carries a permanent aura of settled. He has a wife, 2 toddlers, and a mortgage that he complains about with a peculiar kind of pride. This morning, he was showing me photos of his daughter's birthday party. "You'll get there soon enough, man," he said, slapping me on the back. "Just wait until you're chasing a 3-year-old around a bouncy castle. You'll miss the quiet weekends." I smiled and gave him the expected response, a lighthearted joke about enjoying my freedom while it lasts. But inside, I felt a familiar hollow ache. David looks at me and sees a young, successful bachelor with his whole life ahead of him. He doesn't see the training wheels. He doesn't see that my quiet weekends aren't a choice. They're a consequence of a missing skill set. The disconnect between my professional self and my romantic self is jarring. How can I be so confident in a room full of executives, yet feel like a trembling teenager? When a woman I find attractive asks me what I'm doing on Friday night, it feels like there's a partition in my brain, a wall that prevents the confidence I've built in my career and the gym from leaking into my personal life. I've tried to professionalize my dating life, treating it like a sales funnel or a project to be managed. I read books on body language. I listened to podcasts about high-value men. I analyze my conversion rates on dating apps, but you can't optimize a human connection. You can't A/B test a soul. The more I try to fix the problem with logic, the more I realize that logic is exactly what's holding me back. My inexperience isn't just a lack of stories or a lack of sexual partners, it's a lack of spontaneity. Because I feel like I have so much to prove, I'm constantly monitoring myself. I'm checking my own behavior against an invisible checklist. Am I leaning in too much? Am I talking about myself too much? Did I wait long enough to text back? It's a performance. And women, I've come to realize, are incredibly attuned to performances. They can sense when a man is acting a part rather than just being. That's the scent I keep thinking about. It's the smell of effort. It's the vibe of someone who is trying to pass a test rather than enjoy a moment. I remember a conversation I had with David a few weeks ago during a late night push to finish a proposal. We were fueled by cold coffee and the hum of the air conditioner. "You're a good-looking guy, man," he'd said, looking up from his laptop. "Great job, solid head on your shoulders. Why are you still single? You should be fighting them off with a stick." I hesitated, the truth hovering on the tip of my tongue. I wanted to tell him that I felt like I was missing a piece of the puzzle. I wanted to ask him how he knew when to kiss his wife for the first time, or how he navigated the messy, uncertain beginning of their relationship without losing his mind. Instead, I gave the safe answer. "Just haven't found the right person yet, I guess. I guess busy with work." Busy with work. David chuckled. "Don't wait too long, buddy. The good ones get snatched up, and before you know it, you're the weird guy at the bar who's 10 years older than everyone else." His words weren't meant to be cruel, but they hit me like a physical blow. The weird guy at the bar. The man who waited too long. The man who missed the boat. I looked at David, his slightly receding hairline, his tired eyes, his stained coffee mug, and I realized I would give anything to have what he had. I would trade the six-pack abs and the promotion in a heartbeat for the messy, complicated, settled life of someone who actually understood how to connect with another human being. The gym, which used to be my escape, is starting to feel like a cage of its own. I find myself looking at my progress in the mirror and feeling a strange sense of resentment. I did what you asked, I think to myself, staring at my reflection. I got the muscles. I got the low body fat. I got the look. Where is the rest of it? It's like I've been building a magnificent temple for a god that hasn't shown up. I'm physically ready for a partner, but emotionally I'm still that 23-year-old kid who walked out of his first long-term relationship and realized he didn't know how to talk to anyone else. I've started to notice a pattern in the rejections I receive. It's rarely about my appearance or my status, it's always about the vibe. I've had women tell me I'm too nice or too polished, or that I don't seem like I have any edges. At first I took those as compliments. I thought being a nice polished guy with no edges was the goal. I thought that's what a lifelong partner was supposed to be. But now I see that edges are what make you interesting. Edges are the result of making mistakes, of having your heart broken, of failing and getting back up. Because I've spent so much time trying to be perfect, trying to avoid the no's, I've scrubbed away the very things that make a person magnetic. I feel like a man-child, not in the sense of being irresponsible. I'm probably more responsible than 90% of the people I know, but in the sense of being emotionally prepubescent. There's a specific kind of maturity that only comes from navigating the dating game, from the highs of a new crush to the lows of a painful breakup. I've had one long steady climb followed by a plateau. I haven't been in the trenches. I haven't learned the resilience that comes from being ghosted or the grace that comes from letting someone go. I'm a 30-year-old man with a 5-year-old's understanding of romantic complexity. And that, I think, is what women smell on me. They smell the safety. They smell the lack of risk. They see a man who is so terrified of being seen as inexperienced that he's become a caricature of experience. I'm like an actor playing a cool guy in a high school play. The costume is right, the lines are memorized, but the eyes are full of panic. I want to break the cycle. I want to throw away the script. I want to walk up to a woman and say, "I'm 30 years old, I have no idea what I'm doing, and I'm terrified of making a mistake." But the good guy in me, the one who wants to be seen as competent and reliable, won't let me do it. He's the one holding the handlebars of the bike, refusing to let go, convinced that if the training wheels come off, I'll crash so hard, I'll never get back up. I find myself sitting in my car after work, sometimes just staring at the dashboard. The silence is heavy. I think about the years ahead, the 31st birthday, the 35th, the 45th. If I don't figure this out now, if I don't find a way to bleed the inexperience out of my system, what does my life look like? Am I destined to be the successful, fit, lonely man who has everything but has nothing? The thought is more terrifying than any rejection I've ever faced. It's a slow-motion car crash, and I'm the only one who can see it coming. The invitation sat on my kitchen counter for 3 weeks, a heavy cream-colored card that felt like a summons to a trial I wasn't prepared for. It was for Mark's wedding. Mark had been my best friend since middle school, the guy who was with me through the high school breakups and the long, stable years of my one major relationship. He was the one who saw me at my most settled, and he was the one who saw me crumble when it ended. Now he was moving into the next chapter, and the +1 line on the RSVP card felt like a mocking void. I stared at it every morning while my coffee brewed a silent reminder that while my life was together on paper, the chair across from me was still empty. I decided to go alone. I told myself it was a power move, a statement of independence, but as I pulled up to the vineyard where the ceremony was being held, the old familiar knot tightened in my stomach. The parking lot was a parade of SUVs and luxury sedans, couples stepping out in coordinated outfits laughing and adjusted each other's ties. I adjusted my own tie in the rearview mirror, checking the knot for the 10th time. My suit was custom tailored, a deep charcoal that made me look every bit the successful professional I was. I looked like a man who belonged at a high-end wedding. I looked like a man who had his life figured out. But as I stepped onto the gravel path, I felt those invisible training wheels dragging behind me, rattling with every step. The ceremony was beautiful, the kind of sunset affair that makes even the most cynical person feel a pang of romantic longing. I sat in the third row, flanked by old college friends and their wives. During the vows, I found myself watching the way Mark looked at his bride. It wasn't just love, it was a deep, weathered understanding. It was the look of two people who had navigated the messy, unpolished realities of being human together. I realized then that I didn't just lack experience in dating, I lacked the calluses of intimacy. My 5-year relationship had been a sheltered harbor. We hadn't truly tested each other. We hadn't fought the real battles of adulthood. I was a man with a pristine romantic record, but in a world that values the scars of experience, being pristine is just another word for being untested. At the reception, the wine flowed and the music picked up. I found myself standing at the edge of the dance floor, a glass of bourbon in my hand, playing the role of the eligible bachelor. I was approached by a few women friends of the bride cousin's colleagues. On paper, these should have been easy wins. I was fit, I was well-spoken, and I had the social endorsement of being one of the groom's oldest friends. But every time a conversation started, I felt the scent of my own anxiety rising like a fog. I would talk about my job, my training, split the latest book I'd read. I was informative, I was polite, I was, as Sarah had put it, a wonderful person. But I wasn't there, not really. I was a few feet behind my own eyes, watching myself perform. I saw a woman named Claire, a bridesmaid with a quick laugh and a sharp intellect, lose interest in real time. We were talking about travel and she mentioned a disastrous trip she'd taken to Italy with an ex-boyfriend. She laughed about the missed trains and the terrible food and the way they ended up screaming at each other in a piazza in Florence. It was the worst trip of my life, she said, her eyes sparkling, but I learned so much about what I don't want. She looked at me waiting for my contribution, and once again the void opened up. I didn't have a disastrous trip story. I didn't have a what I learned about myself story. My travel history was 5 years of carefully planned middle-of-the-road vacations with one person, followed by solo trips where I stayed in nice hotels and followed the itinerary to the letter. I had no mess. I had no chaos. I had no edges. I gave a safe, boring response about a business trip to Chicago where the flight was delayed. The light in her eyes dimmed. She smiled, touched my arm briefly, that polite, dismissive touch, and excused herself to find another drink. I stood there, the bass of the music thumping in my chest, and felt a wave of profound isolation. I realized that my obsession with not looking inexperienced was the very thing making me look inexperienced. By trying to avoid the mistakes, the awkwardness, and the no's, I was cutting myself off from the very experiences that create a personality. I was so afraid of being the guy with the training wheels that I was refusing to ride the bike at all. I was waiting for a level of confidence that only comes from falling, yet I was doing everything in my power to ensure I never fell. I watched Mark and his new wife take their first dance. They weren't perfect dancers. He stepped on her dress once. She laughed and leaned into him. There was a moment where they whispered something to each other, a private joke that made them both beam. They were calibrated. They were in the flow of life. And I was a spectator, a well-dressed statue on the sidelines of my own existence. I realized that the scent women picked up on wasn't just a lack of sexual history or a lack of dating stories. It was the scent of a man who was refusing to participate in the mess of being alive. The training wheels weren't just about dating, they were about my entire approach to risk. In the gym, I took calculated risks. In my career, I took calculated risks. But in my heart, I was a coward. I was so terrified of the no, so terrified of being seen as naive, that I had built a fortress of politeness and stability around myself. I thought I was making myself more attractive, but I was actually making myself invisible. You can't love a fortress. You can only admire its construction from a distance. I left the wedding early, driving back through the dark country roads with the windows down. The cool air felt sharp against my skin. I thought about the scent. I thought about the game. I thought about the fact that I'm turning 30 and I feel like I'm just now waking up to the reality of who I am. I'm a man who has spent so much time preparing for a life that he's forgotten to actually live it. I've been waiting for a sign that I'm ready. But the truth is that readiness is a myth. You're never ready for the mess. You're never ready for the no. You just have to be willing to hear it and keep walking. As I pulled into my driveway, I didn't feel the usual sense of relief. My apartment, with its perfect furniture and its organized shelves, felt like a museum of a man who didn't exist. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel, the hands that could bench press hundreds of pounds, the hands that signed major contracts, the hands that had only ever truly known one woman. I realized that the training wheels were never going to be taken off by someone else. There was no magical partner who was going to show up and teach me how to be a man. I had to be the one to unbolt them. I had to be the one to risk the crash. The Monday after the wedding was different. Usually I returned to the office with a renewed sense of focus, using the routine of work to drown out the echoes of a lonely weekend. But as I sat at my desk, the glow of the dual monitors felt cold. David was already there, regaling another coworker with a story about how his toddler had managed to paint the family dog blue over the weekend. They were laughing a warm human sound that seemed to vibrate in a frequency I couldn't quite reach. I looked at the spreadsheets on my screen, the rows of data, the perfect formulas, and for the first time in my career, they looked meaningless. I realized that I had spent the last few years trying to outrun my inexperience by being perfect in every other area of my life. I thought if I was the best employee, the strongest lifter, and the most reliable friend, the universe would eventually reward me with the one thing I actually wanted. But life isn't a vending machine. You don't just put in good behavior tokens and wait for a partner to drop out of the slot. I had been playing a game of avoidance, and the prize was a very high quality, very expensive cage. That evening at the gym, I didn't head for the heavy racks immediately. I stood by the water fountain watching the ebb and flow of people. I saw a guy maybe a few years younger than me talking to a girl near the cardio machines. He wasn't particularly fit, and his form on the treadmill had been questionable at best. But he was leaning against the railing laughing at something she said, and his body language was completely open. He wasn't calibrating. He wasn't checking a mental list. He was just there. I watched as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and smiled at him. It was a small, mundane moment, but to me, it looked like a miracle. I walked over to the squat rack, but as I loaded the plates, I felt a sudden, sharp wave of exhaustion. It wasn't physical. My muscles were ready. It was the exhaustion of the performance. I was tired of being the man of mystery, the fit professional, the guy who had it all together. I wanted to be the guy who could paint a dog blue and laugh about it. I wanted to be the guy who could make a fool of himself and not feel like his entire identity was crumbling. I decided right there, under the fluorescent lights, that I was going to do something I never did. I was going to be honest, not polite honest, but raw and comfortable honest. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A woman I'd seen around the gym for months, someone I'd categorized as out of my league, and therefore never approached, was working out on the bench next to mine. Her name was Maya. She was focused and tense and had a presence that commanded respect. In the past, I would have spent 30 minutes thinking of the perfect opening line only to decide the timing wasn't right and walk away. This time I didn't think. I have no idea how to do this, I said as she sat up from her set. She looked at me blinking in surprise. The press your form looks fine. No, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I mean, talking to you, I've been trying to think of a way to say hello to you for 3 months, and every time I try, I feel like I'm back in high school. I'm 30 years old, I'm supposed to be an adult, and I'm standing here terrified of a conversation. The silence that followed was the longest 3 seconds of my life. I felt the scent of my own vulnerability thick in the air. I waited for the pitying smile, that sweet dismissal, the polite exit. Instead, Maya laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh, it was a sound of genuine surprise. Wait, you're 30, she asked, leaning back on the bench. I thought you were one of those guys who has a 5-year plan for his breakfast. You always look so intense, like you're on a mission. I am on a mission? I admitted, the words spilling out now. I'm on a mission to not look like I don't know what I'm doing. My first and only relationship lasted 5 years, and since it ended, I feel like I've been wearing training wheels while everyone else is racing motorcycles. I've been so afraid that people, especially women, can tell I'm inexperienced that I've turned myself into a robot. Maya looked at me for a long time. The robot version of me wanted to apologize, to backtrack, to turn it into a joke. But I stayed still. I let her see the inexperience. I let her see the uncertainty. You know, she said finally, her voice dropping an octave, there's something really exhausting about perfect guys. I meet them all the time. They have the right hair, the right shoes, the right lines. They're like walking LinkedIn profiles. But there's no room for anyone else in their lives because they're too busy maintaining the image. She wiped her forehead with a towel. The fact that you just told me you're terrified, that's the most interesting thing anyone has said to me in this gym in a year. The training wheels didn't disappear in that moment, but they felt lighter. I realized that my inexperience wasn't the problem, my shame about it was. By trying to hide my lack of game, I was hiding my humanity. Women didn't want a man who had mastered the dance through 1,000 repetitions. They wanted a man who was brave enough to be seen even if he didn't know the steps. We talked for 20 minutes. It wasn't a date, and I didn't try to make it one. We talked about the pressure of turning 30, about the absurdity of gym culture, and about how hard it is to make real connections in a world of curated digital lives. For the first time in years, I wasn't monitoring my posture or my tone. I was just a person talking to another person. When I left the gym that night, the night air didn't feel cold. It felt electric. I realized that the scent I was so worried about wasn't something women found off-putting, it was something they found unreliable. Because I was hiding so much of myself, I came across as fake. The politeness was a wall, and the success was a mask. By dropping the mask even for a few minutes, I had created more attraction than 5 years of working on myself ever had. I sat in my car looking at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I still didn't have a horror story from a bad date. I still didn't have the game of a guy like Mike. I was still a man who had only ever truly loved one person. But I realized that being inexperienced wasn't a deficit, it was a starting point. I had been treating my past like a secret I had to keep, rather than a foundation I could build on. The realization was terrifying and liberating at the same time. If I didn't have to be perfect, then I was free to fail. And if I was free to fail, then I was finally free to learn. The training wheels were still there perhaps, but I was the one who had the wrench in my hand. I could feel the first bolt starting to loosen. I thought about the word naive. I had always seen it as a weakness, a sign of being a man-child. But as I drove home, I started to see it differently. Naivety is just another word for openness. It's the ability to see things without the jaded, cynical filter that so many people my age have developed. My friends had their horror stories and their edges, but they also had a lot of baggage. I had a clean slate. I had a capacity for wonder that I had been trying to crush out of myself in favor of sophistication. What if the training wheels weren't a sign of being behind? What if they were just a different way of moving through the world? I didn't need to catch up to everyone else. I just needed to start moving. The next few days felt like I was walking through a house where the furniture had been rearranged. Everything looked familiar, but I kept bumping into the edges of things. The breakthrough with Maya hadn't magically solved my problems, but it had cracked the glass. I found myself at my desk at work staring at a spreadsheet, and instead of obsessing over the perfect formula, I was thinking about the word robot. Maya's words had cut through the armor I'd spent years welding together. I had been so proud of my polish, so convinced that my stability was my greatest asset. I never stopped to consider that to the outside world, I just looked like I was trying too hard to be a finished product. I went back to the gym on Wednesday, my heart doing that strange, fluttery dance again. I wasn't there for the workout. Though I went through the motions, I was there for the possibility of another conversation. When I saw her, she was on the cable machines, her face set in that same expression of intense focus. For a moment, the old me took over. The voice in my head started its familiar chant, "Don't bother her. She's busy. You've already had your one moment. Don't ruin it by being needy. Wait for her to look at you." But I remembered the wrench. I remembered the feeling of the bolt loosening. I finished my set, wiped my face, and walked over. I didn't wait for a clear signal. I didn't wait for her to finish her entire workout. "Hey," I said, standing a respectful distance away. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the walking LinkedIn profiles." Maya stopped letting the weights clank back into place. She wiped a stray hair from her forehead and smiled. It wasn't the polite smile I was used to. It was a smile of recognition. "And did you find any bugs in your operating system?" "Thousands," I admitted. "I realized that I've been treating dating like a job interview where I'm terrified of being unqualified. I've been so focused on selling the best version of me that I forgot to actually show up to the meeting." I took a breath, the air in the gym feeling suddenly thin. "So in the spirit of being unqualified, I'd really like to take you to get a coffee, or a drink, or whatever people do when they aren't trying to look like robots." The old me was screaming internally, "You're doing it wrong. You're supposed to be smooth. You're supposed to build more value first." But Maya just looked at me, her eyes searching mine for a long, quiet moment. "You're still doing it, you know," she said softly. "Doing what?" "Looking like you're waiting for a grade. You're asking me out, but you're holding your breath like I'm about to tell you if you pass the test." She stepped closer, and for the first time I didn't feel the urge to pull back or calibrate. I just felt the heat of the moment. "I'd love to get coffee, but only if you promise to leave the resume at home." That Friday we met at a small independent coffee shop. It was a far cry from the sleek, dimly lit wine bars I usually chose for dates. It was bright, a bit noisy, and smelled of roasted beans and old books. I wore a simple t-shirt and jeans, no custom-tailored suit, no power watch. I felt exposed. Without the trappings of my success, I felt like the 29-year-old with training wheels again. But as I sat across from Maya, watching the way she absent-mindedly stirred her latte, I realized that the exposed feeling was exactly what I had been missing. We talked for 3 hours, and for the first time in my life, I didn't tell stories. I didn't try to impress her with my career trajectory or my squat max. Instead, I talked about the fear of turning 30. I talked about how lonely it felt to be the only single person at a wedding. I even told her about the RSVP card and the +1 void. I expected her to look bored or to give me that pitying, wonderful person look. But she didn't. She told me about her own fears, about her struggle to balance her ambition with her desire for a real connection, about her horror stories that weren't actually funny, just painful. We weren't two high-value individuals exchanging data points. We were two humans sitting in the wreckage of our own expectations trying to find something real. At one point, she asked me about my 5-year relationship. In the past, I would have brushed over it, afraid that it made me look like I lacked variety or experience. But this time, I told her the truth. I told her how it had been my safety net and how losing it had felt like being dropped into the middle of the ocean without a life vest. "I think that's why I'm so afraid of the inexperience thing," I said, tracing the rim of my cup. "I feel like I missed the window where everyone else learned how to handle the mess. I feel like I'm trying to learn a language that everyone else speaks fluently, and I'm still struggling with the alphabet." Maya reached across the table and touched my hand. It was a simple gesture, but it sent a jolt through me that no gym session ever could. "Experience isn't a checklist, you know," she said. "Most people who have experience just have a lot of scar tissue. They've learned how to protect themselves, how to play the game, how to keep people at a distance. They're fluent in the language, but they aren't actually saying anything." She looked me straight in the eyes. "The fact that you don't know the game is why I'm sitting here. It's refreshing. It's honest. Don't trade your honesty for a set of rules that don't even work." I walked her to her car that evening, and the silence between us was different. It wasn't the awkward, pressurized silence of my date with Sarah. It was a quiet, expectant silence. When we reached her door, I felt the old hesitation creep back in. The script started to play, is this the moment? What if I'm wrong? But then I looked at her. I saw the way she was looking at me, not as a project, not as a wonderful person, but as a man. And I realized that I didn't need to know the steps. I didn't need the training wheels. I just needed to be there. I leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a perfect kiss. It was a little clumsy, a little tentative. My heart was racing, and I'm pretty sure I bumped her nose. In the past, I would have been mortified. I would have spent the next week deconstructing the failure. But as we pulled apart, Maya was smiling. "See," she whispered. "No robot would have done that." Driving home that night, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. I was 30, I was inexperienced, and I had just had a messy, imperfect first date. And it was the best night of my life. I realized that the scent I was so worried about wasn't something that pushed women away. It was the scent of my own fear. When I stopped trying to hide my inexperience, it stopped being a cage. It became an invitation. I thought about the gym, the job, the apartment, all the things I had built to prove I was ready. They weren't bad things, but they weren't the point. They were just the scenery. The real work wasn't in the mirror or on the spreadsheet. It was in the willingness to be seen as I was training wheels and all. I realized that every no I had received in the past wasn't a rejection of me, it was a rejection of the mask I was wearing. They couldn't connect with the robot, so they didn't try. I still have a lot to learn. I'm still going to make mistakes. I'm still going to feel naive sometimes. But for the first time, I'm okay with that. I'm not a finished product, and I don't want to be. I want to be a work in progress. I want to be the guy who's brave enough to be unqualified. The scent of inexperience, maybe it's still there, but maybe it's not the scent of failure. Maybe it's the scent of a new beginning. The morning after that date felt different from any morning I had experienced in years. For so long, the first thing I did when I woke up was check the internal status report. I'd scan my body for any signs of weakness, check my calendar for the day's missions, and immediately start the process of building the competent man for the world to see. But that Saturday, I just lay there for a while, looking at the way the light filtered through the blinds. My heart wasn't heavy with the usual leaden weight of inadequacy. I felt light. I felt like I had finally exhaled a breath I'd been holding since my mid-20s. I went to the gym later that morning, but the atmosphere had shifted. It wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was just a building with some heavy stuff in it. I saw Maya across the room, and for the first time I didn't feel that frantic need to look good or be intense. I just caught her eye and gave her a small, genuine wave. She smiled back with a real lingering smile and went back to her workout. There was no game being played. There was no tactical maneuver. We were just two people who liked each other, and the simplicity of that was almost overwhelming. On Monday, the office felt less like a theater and more like a workplace. David was in his usual spot nursing a coffee and looking slightly more frazzled than usual. Apparently, the blue dog incident had evolved into a blue carpet incident, and his wife wasn't speaking to him. In the past, I would have offered a polite attached comment, something that kept my perfect image intact, but this time I leaned over the partition. "That sounds exhausting, man," I said. "Honestly, I don't know how you do it. I went on a date Friday and I was so nervous I almost forgot how to speak English. I can't imagine trying to manage a house, a career, and a blue dog all at once." David paused his mug halfway to his mouth. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time the seniority in his eyes faded. "You were nervous?" he asked, a bit of a laugh in his voice. The guy who looks like he has a spreadsheet for his heartbeat." "Terrified," I admitted. "I felt like I had training wheels on the whole time." David leaned back in his chair, sighing. "Brother, let me tell you a secret. The training wheels never really come off. You just get better at hiding the wobbles. I've been married for 8 years, and there are still days where I feel like I'm 15 years old wondering if I'm doing everything wrong. We're all just faking the adult part until it becomes a habit." That conversation did more for my self-esteem than any promotion ever could. I realized that my mistake hadn't been my inexperience. It was my belief that everyone else was settled and sure. I had been comparing my raw internal blooper reel to everyone else's highlight film. I had been looking at guys like Mike and David and seeing finished products, never realizing that they were just as messy and uncertain on the inside as I was. They just had more practice at navigating the mess. As the weeks went by, my relationship with Maya grew into something I hadn't expected. It wasn't the easy, frictionless comfort of my high school sweetheart years. It was challenging. It was vocal. It required me to constantly bump into my own limitations and admit when I didn't know the right move. There were moments of friction, moments where my inexperience did show up, not as a lack of game, but as a lack of conflict resolution skills. I had to learn how to argue without withdrawing. I had to learn how to express needs without feeling like I was being needy. One evening, we were sitting on her balcony, the city lights stretching out below us. I told her about how I used to feel like women could smell my inexperience on me. Maya laughed, leaning her head on my shoulder. "Maybe they could," she said softly, "but you were thinking of it as a bad thing. You thought it smelled like failure. To me, it didn't smell like failure. It smelled like potential. It smelled like a man who hadn't become cynical yet. It smelled like someone who actually cared about the person he was with rather than just the act of dating. I realized then that the scent wasn't a curse, it was a filter. The women who were looking for a finished product, for someone to play a specific role in their lives, were naturally pushed away by my uncertainty. But the woman who was looking for a partner, for someone real, someone who was willing to grow and be honest, was drawn to it. My flaw was actually my greatest asset. It ensured that the only people who stayed were the ones who actually liked me, not the mask I was trying so hard to wear. Turning 30 didn't feel like a funeral anymore. It felt like a graduation. I wasn't behind in the race of life because I had finally realized that there was no race, there was no deadline for being fully formed. I looked at my life, the career I'd built, the body I'd strengthened, the friendships I was finally making real, and I realized that the training wheels were gone. Not because I had suddenly become experienced, but because I had finally stopped being afraid of falling. The world of dating and the world of human connection in general is a messy, unscripted place. You can prepare all you want, you can build the perfect version of yourself, but if you aren't willing to be seen in your raw, unpolished state, you'll never truly connect with anyone. Your inexperience isn't a badge of shame. It's a sign that you have more room to grow than anyone else. It's a sign that your story isn't written yet. So if you're sitting there feeling like you're the only one who hasn't figured it out, if you feel like everyone can see your training wheels, I want you to ask yourself, what are you so afraid would happen if you just let yourself fall? Because the moment you stop trying to stay perfectly upright is the moment you actually start moving forward. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever felt like you were behind in life? How did you deal with that feeling of being inexperienced while everyone else seemed to have it figured out? Your stories might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more stories about the messy, beautiful reality of becoming who we're meant to be.